you weren't a member of the Labour Party, but you were part of the campaign which won Jeremy Corbyn the Labour leadership.
I wasn't part of the campaign which won him the Labour
Oh,
leadership.
you were in favour of him becoming leader.
I'll be honest with you. At the time, I was a late adopter. At the time, I was sort of still a bit of like a sulky anarchist, and I sort of thought like, oh, the party political form is dead. And it took me a while to see the real opportunity. It wasn't really until 2017 itself, shortly before the election, when I thought this thing's really important.
But you joined the Corbyn Labour Party.
I did.
And you hadn't been before, so there was some element of support there. Did you see him as a start on the road to communism, or just a Labour leader who was at least roughly on the same planet as you?
I saw him as a Labour leader who was capable of taking the concerns of my generation seriously. I didn't see him as a starter on the road to communism at all. And I didn't necessarily see him as being on the same planet as me in lots of ways, particularly to do with drugs policy, particularly to do with policing policy. We were really, really miles apart. But the reason why you'd see those pictures of him on Holloway Road and he'd be like surrounded by like, just like utes. Do you know what I mean? Just like, teenagers wearing North Face jackets. It's because he was speaking to their material conditions. And even though I am, at heart a kind of, disappointed utopian, you can't help but be moved by that. And that was what got me to join the party.
If Labour was going to choose a leader more to the left than traditional, was he the right left-winger to choose?
I don't know. I mean, because then you get into these counterfactuals where you could pick a different MP, for example, John McDonnell, and he would never have gotten to the ballot because am I allowed to curse on this?
A little bit, yes.
All right. He'd pissed off everybody in the party.
That's quite mild.
Including everyone in the Socialist campaign group as well. So I think that it could have only been Corbyn because of the unique set of circumstances that were there. And, I've said this before, but Corbyn's greatest strengths were also his greatest weaknesses. He couldn't be anyone other than himself, and people were drawn to him because of that. But it also meant that when you had to be adaptive and reactive and responsive and to respond to things that maybe you think are unfair, he wasn't well placed to do any of those things.
Was there a time when you thought he could be Prime Minister?
Yeah.
When was that?
It was in the, final run-up to the 2017 election. I thought this could happen.
Oh, you thought he might have won in 2017?
I thought this really could happen.
Helped by the quality of Theresa May's campaign.
Well, people say that a lot, but she added a lot to the Tories' vote share. It just wasn't distributed
She lost
properly.
a lot to the Tory parliamentary representation.
She lost in seats, and that's because it was a crap campaign. But
that was my point.
And these are these were the warning signs for Corbyn, really, which is you looked at where she was stacking up votes. That was the crumbling red wall. But no, I thought it's almost painful to remember it because I just think, oh, what could have been.
If he'd become Prime Minister, what do you think Britain's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine would have been? I
think that in some ways it wouldn't have been that different. I think that
he would have sent weapons from day one?
Not from day one. I think it would have been later down the line, but I think
he would have sent heavy armour?
I think that his NATO scepticism would have been tempered by the nature of being in government.
He would have encouraged Finland and Sweden to join NATO?
I don't think it would have encouraged Finland or Sweden to join NATO, but then again, I don't think many of us would have thought that would be where we end up right, from the beginning. I thought
no, but the British government has encouraged. I mean, they've been in the vanguard of encouraging these two Scandinavian countries to join. I mean, even not in power, Mr. Corbyn hasn't been able to bring himself to say one kind word about President Zelensky.
Has he not? I mean, I've not been keeping up with his interviews, if I'm honest with you. I really haven't been.
He's attacked. He said he was against the invasion, but who isn't against the invasion?
He said, I don't know him, so I can't speak to him.
Exactly.
I think that's a very Corbyn thing, which is, there's an answer which is politic, and then there's the one that he wants to give, and he gives the one that he wants to give.
I I mean, it's pretty hard to argue that our response would have been the same.
I don't. But I genuinely
or anything like.
I genuinely think that in power, when you're confronted with the day-to-day decisions of the deteriorating situation on the Ukrainian border, the scale of the Russian invasion, the devastation in Bucha and Mariupol, I think that ultimately the response would have been similar, in the same ballpark, purely because that's what the situation demands.
And yet he's been almost entirely silent about it.
I'm not his spokesperson. I don't know
I understand
why.
that, but you did want him to be Prime Minister.
I did want him to be Prime Minister.
And you thought he could be. So that's why I'm asking you. The Labour left has taken control of the party twice in the past 70 years. Both times it's taken Labour to catastrophic defeats. Isn't it time to learn that lesson?
Well, the question I would pose back is, in Tony Blair's 3 back-to-back election victories, the 1997 landslide, how many of those policy decisions are still with us, right? Sure Start got gutted. The sort of Blairite social settlement, of which was, a kind of like little bit more social democratic Thatcherism, that's all gone. And so I'm not saying that I'm a particularly adept political strategist, because I don't think I am. But what I would say to the sort of, moderate or right wing of the Labour Party is, why haven't you been able to entrench any of your social programme? Why was it so easy to wipe away?
The minimum wage is still there.
Minimum wage is still there.
The huge increases in spending in schools and hospitals that happened under Blair
But now
Brown,
look at what's happened to per pupil funding. What's happened to the NHS. And one of the things which I think now interest rates are going up has been unforgivable.
But that's because you haven't won elections.
But no, in terms of what was happening under Blair, it's not like you had a massive council house building programme. It's not as if you had an attempt to do Margaret Thatcher, I think, is, along with Clement Attlee, the 2 most visionary prime ministers that we've ever had.
Well, they were the 2 most transformative peacetime prime ministers.
And in the same way, we are still living with remnants of Attlee's Britain. I think we are living in Thatcher's Britain in a huge way.
Well, we have the welfare state.
Right, we have the welfare state.
And we have the NHS.
What's left of it?
We spend almost 200 billion a year on it, so there's a fair bit left of it.
What Thatcher understood, and this is what Blair didn't understand, and this is what I think Corbyn was trying to do. So she famously said, economics is the method, the object is to change the soul. She created an economic environment which pumped out Tory voters, all right? That was what Right to Buy was about. That's what the attacks on the unions were about, the demise of heavy industry. It pumped out Tory voters. Blair, with his back-to-back election victories, didn't do that, right? He didn't create those kind of economic machines which create Labour voters. And I genuinely believe that if even just a bit of that 2017 manifesto, so the commitments on council housing, education spending, empowering trade unions again, I think if those things had happened, I think they would have been comparable, perhaps not on the scale, but comparable on the same planet as the scale of Thatcher's changes, which meant we would have been with them for a really long time.
But voters aren't forever. Political parties don't get to own voters forever. And although Blair did create a huge coalition to produce 2 landslides plus a comfortable victory 3rd time, and Thatcher did reconfigure the way people voted during her time, millions of people who voted for Margaret Thatcher voted for Tony Blair.
And that's because, Tony Blair, if you're my honest opinion, I don't think it's a coincidence that, the first Labour leader in decades also happened, to end up being the godfather to one of Rupert Murdoch's children, right? He had to make a deal with an incredibly right-wing media landscape. Before that, when you had Labour prime ministers, it was when the Daily Mirror was the biggest selling newspaper in this country. The media environment was totally different. Made a bit of a deal with the devil. He says, look, don't go for us too hard. There are certain things we're not going to touch, and it's not going to be hugely different to when the Conservatives were in power. And they go, okay, that's what we're going to do. I'm not saying that parties own voters, far from it. I'm saying that a party which is serious about its longevity and its legacy understands that the policies that you introduce have to, produce the electorate that is most conducive to you winning power again. And I think that Tony Blair, for all of his vision and his strategy, didn't do that.
Is there a parliamentary route to your kind of communism?
Probably not. Probably not. I don't know what the route is, and I'm saying this with
Well, that was my next question. If it's not a parliamentary route, what is it?
I absolutely do not know. I do not know, and there have of course been different radical experiments. You've had the Paris Commune, you've had the autonomists, you've had the attempt to sort of build, autonomous small communities. You've got the thing which, my colleague Aaron Bastani writes about, which is sort of going back to Marx's first principles and saying, look, technological change is going to bring this thing. I don't know what it is, and I don't pretend to either.